thank you everyone for joining. I've been really excited about actually sitting down and talking to everyone today. My name's Jordan. I work for RealVNC, and today we're going to be deep diving into a comparison of remote access tools. Now, before we begin, there is a little bit of housekeeping. On your right, you'll find a question column. If you can throw in your questions there, if we can't get to them during the webinar, we'll make sure to cover them at the end. Secondly, the webinar is also being recorded. So we will share a recording with everyone who registered after this evening. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, keep a lookout, and we'll be sure to fire that across. And I think finally, just as some of you may have noticed, we've got another speaker that's actually joining us today. So due to security events that have occurred within remote access over the last couple of weeks, we thought it was sensible to bring Ben in from a security perspective to answer any questions that you guys have as well. But yeah, really looking forward to jumping into this with you guys. So in terms of introductions, my name's Jordan, as I mentioned before. Obviously looking forward to speaking to you. We also have Rich on the call here as well, who'll give a quick introduction as to who he is and what he does.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really excited to be here today. I might have met some of you over the years. I've been at RealVNC a long time in a customer-facing role. So really looking forward to getting some content across to you today and sharing some insights over the last few years. And yeah, this is my first webinar, so it's really important this goes well.
Cool, thank you. I've introduced Ben, but actually, in second thought, Ben, would it be quick to just give yourself a quick introduction as well, so I'm not talking for you?
Yeah. Thanks, Jordan. As you said, I've joined this call kind of last minute, really, to help out with any questions that may be coming up around any security events that have happened recently, and then hopefully to add a bit on to some of the security related slides we have here today.
Nice one, thank you, Ben. So in terms of an agenda today, I think generally speaking, when it comes to webinars, oftentimes people kind of stick to the beginning bit and not give you any meat in the webinar. And what we want to do today is make sure we give you as much value as possible. So I'm going to fly through this agenda, and then we'll move into what we're here for, which is giving you guys clarity as to what is out there, what you should be looking for, and how you make that decision when you are choosing that remote access platform. So today we're going to be navigating the remote access landscape, focusing on requirements. We'll give you a quick tour of pricing capabilities, what that balance actually looks like. In addition to this, we'll be giving you some insight into actually the platforms themselves. A lot of businesses claim they're secure, but how do you actually prove that? How do you make sure that you are making that right selection? Finally, we're going to give you some expert recommendations, just some guidance, I guess you could say, from some people that live and breathe in this space. And finally, we'll be wrapping up with a Q&A session. So when we look at the remote access market, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot out there. Before I dive into all of these companies, I think it'd be good to get a bit of a show of hands as to, number one, who identifies some of these companies and potentially what remote access platforms you're using. So in the Q&A section, if you could just quickly type in who you're using and potentially how long you've been using them for, that'd be great to get a bit of clarity as to what's out there. But I think it's clear and fair to say that there is a lot out there. There's the standard remote access platforms that and see every day, TeamViewers, the AnyDesks of this world, RealVNC, Splashtop. And then you've got open source projects as well that float about too. OEM built tools as well in there. And really that can be a bit of a messy experience as a customer that's trying to make their first step into purchasing something. And even actually as someone that has purchased remote access before, this market can be a little bit daunting. It can be hard to get clarity on what's out there, what security features they have, and really from a product perspective, what these companies are doing differently. And again, today's goal is to give you some of that clarity so you can go home and make some educated decisions as to what's out there. Today we're going to be focusing on 4 key companies. This feels like when you do a webinar, a little bit of death by PowerPoint, but hopefully it'll be relevant, interesting, and exciting when we finally fly through these. So the companies we're going to be looking at are RealVNC Connect, TeamViewer, Splashtop, and AnyDesk as well. Now, before we actually set off on this destination, I think it's important to give you a bit of background and a bit of clarity. So I gave you guys my name earlier, but I didn't actually give you any insight into what it is that I actually do. So at RealVNC, I work within the outbound business function, heading the charge and speaking to new customers on a day-to-day basis. My role involves making sure I get an understanding of what businesses are looking for when they knock on our doors. Now, from a customer perspective, it's really, really important that you have a great relationship with the remote access providers that you're speaking to, that you get and ask as many questions from them as possible. But more importantly, before you even dive into that relationship, it's so important to get clarity from every single stakeholder in the business that may have some influence or may be using the remote access product in some degree. Now, what we tend to see is that sometimes businesses will come over with an idea of what they want to be implementing across their operations. And the reality after a couple of weeks, a couple of months, is actually that conversation grows and adapts. So I think it's crucial for you to know what you have to have, what your must-haves are, versus actually what your nice-to-haves are. Because there's a lot of features out there, and some of them potentially may be completely, irrelevant to your actual needs. And then finally, before you set off on this journey, it's really important to define what your objectives are, and finally, what your desired outcomes are too. Because it's easy to pick a product, but once you're tied into that contract for a year, we see a lot of companies that end up getting burnt quite quickly, and you want to make sure that you set yourself off on that first great foot. We'll also be discussing price and capabilities today. This is a big and a hot topic, and that balance is sometimes a little bit tricky to figure out. Really, what we want to be looking at is one thing in particular, which is the total cost of ownership. What does that cost you as a business when you are meant to, take that first step into implementing this remote access product into your operations? Now, there's 7 key areas of consideration that we're going to be going through today. I'm going to take a bit of a pause, stop burning your ears off, and let Richard give you some insight here. Richard's been selling this product, I'll be honest with you, longer than anyone I know. And hopefully his insights into this space will give you guys some clarity as to what's out there.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I was just taking a look at some of the comments coming through. We've got some people that have used TeamViewer for a long time. Someone's been using Quick Assist, a bit of RDP included as well. So if you've got any questions or feedback throughout the session, this is great stuff and good things to have in place, and we can certainly cover these off as well. One person's been using TeamViewer for a long time, right? So it's good to see the type of products that people are using in this space. But yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about security first. Now, we were trying to rank where these slides would fit, right? And I think what's happened in the last couple of weeks is security should be covered first. So if we're moving on a slide on that, we can see there's 4 main areas that we're looking at here. So we want to know about, when you're considering options, you want to be looking at the security mindset of the vendor, what they've done historically, and more importantly, what they're going to be doing in the future in regards to security. A lot of our job as vendors is to anticipate where the themes are and what we think is going to happen in the space in the next 12 to 18 months from a security standpoint. I think during the COVID pandemic particularly, we saw a lot of dispersed workforces, and that was a bit of a headache for IT departments that were maybe managing things a lot on site and a lot on the same network. And then suddenly you had these really big changes in the industry and in the world that meant that dispersed workforces need to be supported from wherever they are. So it's really about if the vendors is anticipating events that are going to change the industry and what their stance is on that. The other area to consider is independent verification. So a lot of the customers that we work with, they'll say to us about our security credentials. And actually, me and Jordan, we were thinking about ideas for this webinar. He came up with an interesting observation he had from one particular customer. Jordan, I think maybe it's a good time to share that thought.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I think it's an observation is a nice way to put it, but or maybe a very generous way to put it. I keep seeing on a lot of different websites this phrase military grade encryption, and I'll be honest, I don't actually know what that means. And when I speak to customers, they don't know what it means either. So there is like a surrounding theme of, businesses using marketing to promote a security stance. And that doesn't really do anything for you as a vendor. You have to get clarity from businesses about what actually the security protocols are. They say 74% of all attacks involve a human basically based element, which really means that sometimes when you are picking that product out, it's great that it has all the features that you need and you want, but actually what else has it got in there, and how much do your team know how to use that product? Oftentimes businesses will shake your hand and say good luck and see you later. I think it's really important when you are picking that product out that you have an evaluation of it, but you also sit down and ask that vendor, can you give me a little bit of help here, and can you potentially guide me on a little bit as to how best to use your product?
Yeah, and I think that speaks nicely to the independent verification. So what we have a RealVNC is an independent report that was done by a German-based company a couple of years ago called Cure53. And what they did was they came into our organization, they picked through our processes, how we develop, how we adjust to change, and they basically produced an independent report saying RealVNC Connect is as secure as it can be. And they gave us some recommendations, right, about how we can make it more secure, especially with our development processes. So these are areas where we can hold up a document and say, well, we have this. Can you ask the other vendors that you're considering to also produce something like that? And it's quite a key point when you want to see what the credentials are for the vendor that you're dealing with. So this is a good area to keep in mind when you're doing your research. If we push on another slide, we've got a comparison matrix here of the different vendors that we're looking at today and how well they do in this space. Obviously, there's a lot of green in there, and as you'd expect to have in a security slide, it's a hot topic, and there have to be areas that have to be covered from a compliance point of view. What's interesting here, we'll pick out a couple of them, and I'll bring Ben in on a couple of these as well. So you can see we've got one there on the second line down for decentralized device IDs. Ben, I'm going to bring you in on that. Can you just give us a flavor of what that is and what essentially what that means?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. So decentralized device IDs, or kind of ring-fenced devices. So the way some remote access solutions work is that once you start your program, once you download the binary and run it, is that it will be listening, and anyone else who had that program could then run it on their computer and maybe be able to discover that device and connect to it with just the device ID. So sometimes the solution doesn't even need a password. Just as soon as it's listening, you can potentially connect by knowing that ID. But even if it did use a password, by having it discoverable, then it potentially opens you up for brute force attacks or password reuse attacks, these kinds of things. With RealVNC Connect, we've kind of gone about it in a different way, and the devices are only discoverable that if they're within your team. So you cannot find any RealVNC connected devices out there unless you've been explicitly granted access by the team admin. And that is both discovering and then further, connecting to that device, which I think, really kind of reduces down the attack surface.
Yeah, I'm just.
Sorry, Rich. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I was just. I saw some questions pop through, and I thought maybe now might be a good time to just maybe get you guys to give them some insight. We had a question come through earlier from John Softly, and he asked that he said he used to use RealVNC for a long time on Chromebooks, and then we removed the support for Chrome OS apps, and he understands why, but he had to go elsewhere. How do we cater for these devices now? Would you be able to give them some insight with regards to that?
Yeah, and appreciate the question. Thank you very much. So VNC-based applications have a really good platform support process, and we'll come on a lot more to that with the interoperability slide that we're going to show a bit later. Chrome OS is an interesting platform to support. I think in the space at the moment, there's a lot out there to help with viewing a Chromebook, but not so much out there to be able to actually interact and control it. Funny enough, this has been an item of discussion internally at RealVNC about what we do in this space. And being a VNC-based product, it's important that we're able to support as many operating systems as possible. I think we have to balance that with what the market looks like and whether view-only is good enough, right? Is a view-only product good enough for what customers need, or is it essential that they have an ability to control the device? And I think in the education space in particular, Chromebooks are a highly utilized device because of the cost of them and given how scalable they are. Now, there may be an argument to say, well, Android is becoming quite a prolific operating system at the moment, and maybe that's where the focus should be on the market. But I take your point, John, and if there's more questions on that, we'll be happy to pick it up offline. But thank you very much. It was a good question. We'll cover that as well a bit later in the webinar.
I've got one more question for you. Sorry, Rich. I'm relentless with these, but we can cover, I think, quite a few of these at the end, guys. So if I miss you out initially, I promise I will get to your question in the end. But we got one from a gentleman called Josh, and he said, given the news about the breach at AnyDesk, what's to stop the same happening with RealVNC? Perhaps, Ben, you could give us some insight into that.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and obviously relates to the slide that we've got here today. I think it can really be broken down into two different areas, and given that really we haven't really been given many information publicly regarding what actually happened with the AnyDesk breach, it's hard to comment on specifics. But if you break it down into what we do have, which is us as a company, and then us as our product, and what defenses the product have. So some of the items at the bottom there regarding ISO 27001 compliance. AnyDesk, for example, let's talk about their data centers being ISO 27001 compliant, which is very different to the whole organization being compliant. The process is a very involved process to get ISO 27001 compliant. It takes weeks, months, or even years to get to the level required. There's lots of processes, lots of policies needed for many different topics across the organization, from change management, access management, those kind of things. So there's a very big difference between your company being ISO 27001 compliant and just your data centers, because realistically, most data centers are, if not all, going to be ISO 27001 compliant. So really, that's just it's just a tick box versus the hard work that goes into getting that certification.
Yeah, and I think that raises a good area, right? So, part of what we do is recognize that there's security threats everywhere, and whether you're looking at free tools, tools that are included in your operating system, or third-party tools like RealVNC Connect or TeamViewer, there are risks to each one, right? It's how an organization goes to mitigate those risks and what can be put in place to stop them. What we have is a proactive approach to security, and it's how we build the product as opposed to a reactive process. So I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're going through our business process and what we do with the product, essentially. There was a trend in 2023 in particular regarding multi-factor authentication, and we see that theme continuing a lot for this year as well. So being able to connect to a device, but also provide that second form of ID before you can get access to it. And this is a surefire way to be as locked down as you can be about what users can access what devices. And on a broader theme, we have customers that have global support teams. So you'll have a support team in Singapore, a support team in North America. And when you're considering different vendors, it's important to work out what support base you want supporting one side of the world. And you'll have a senior leadership team that needs supporting as well. And you may not want a first level support person accessing the CEO's device for support purposes. So there's solutions, and RealVNC Connect has this, where you can restrict discovery of devices to specific people in the support organization and in the hierarchy. And these are the sort of things that you should pick with your vendor about. Do they have this type of functionality? And are they thinking about the next 6 to 12 months in regards to security and what may come up in that as well?
Yeah, really, I think, again, it comes back to the split between the different layers between what you have in your product and then what you have as a company, and getting that verification through compliance, white papers, all that kind of good stuff, independent verification that you're doing what you say you do.
Yeah, that's right. And we've got another question from Vance regarding, and the question is, will you have a proxy server option available or similar to what UltraVNC provides in the near future? Vance, we'll come on to that. I think that's a good point to move on to the next slide. So we're going to be talking a bit about the connectivity option as well. So essentially what we're talking about at this point is how you can actually get access to a device. And there's some questions that you need to ask the vendor, and certainly questions they should ask you as well about what your setup looks like. Do you have devices that are offline? Do you have a corporate network that you need to support? And how often do you have to support users which are off network or off domain even, and off traveling? So it's important for them to find out that in the pre-sales process as well. Now, at RealVNC, for many years, we offered a purely direct-only option with IP address. That changed in 2016 when we offered a cloud solution. And by cloud, we mean we broker the connection. We can't see the data. We can't access the data. It's a secure connection with end-to-end encryption. But before that, we had to go through a process of network changes, port forwarding, and all that horrible stuff that you really don't want to do in an IT department. So it's working out if you've got devices that are air gapped. So maybe you've got servers that are internal that you just don't want to be exposed to the internet, but you've also got a corporate network that you support and users that are traveling, right? So you may have a hybrid approach where you've got direct and also cloud connections. And if you've got a single solution that can do that, direct and cloud, it makes it easier for cybersecurity teams and InfoSec to be able to sign off on the product, because it's a single solution that they verified. They can prove it's got ISO 27001, and therefore you're clear to use it in these situations. We had a call this morning with a customer who had a large number of licenses. They've been with us for about 3 years. They were using direct-only connections, and now we're thinking about, okay, we've got this dispersed workforce. Maybe we need to start looking at the cloud. And it's a security conversation, really. They want to know about where the data goes, who can see it, and making sure that it's as locked down as possible. I'm going to bring in Jordan. He had an example with a customer he worked with recently that had this hybrid approach.
Yeah, it was much like yourself, Richard. It was a bit of an unusual example, because essentially what had happened is they'd always been on cloud, and they were happy with the vendor that they were using because it supported cloud. The reality is basically the business, I believe, started shifting in a different direction, and on-prem was becoming very, very important for them, and very quickly becoming very important for them. And while they thought they had that ability to have that on-prem access with their provider, the reality was completely different. And what ended up happening is they basically got stuck in a license for almost half a year. The issue with that was, number one, they were paying for a product that said they could support something that really couldn't support it in terms of speed, performance, matching that environment, that they had before. And they've been essentially just burnt in a contract where they needed to find something else, a new solution that could support on-prem. And they knocked on a few doors. Thankfully, we do support on-prem. Our customers tend to love that as well. And I think one of the differences are when you have a conversation with us, and Richard, you kind of alluded to this in the beginning. When you have a conversation with us, we really want to get clarity on what your operations are like. What do you do as a company? Who are you as a business? And where are you going, not just this year, but in the next year and the year after that? And if we can get that clarity and give you an opinion, an honest answer about roadmap, what we're doing, then you can make that educated decision yourself.
Yeah, and it just made me think of another customer that we worked with recently, and we'll talk about iOS and Android later. But this hybrid approach of direct and cloud means that if you've got devices that you prefer to connect to, when you've got a VPN established first, then you use another remote access product to actually see the screen and interact with it, then you can have that option. But obviously, if you've got iOS and Android devices, they're either going to be managed by an MDM, and you still want to get access to the screen and help users out. So in that example, this customer that we work with had that scenario. They wanted to lock down as much as possible with direct, but also they realized that they're going to have to use our cloud services to get access to their iOS and Android devices wherever they are. So again, it's working with VPNs. It's knowing what the limits are for operating systems as well. In this example that we're showing on the screen right now, we've got, I think it's industry known that TeamViewer have a really good product for cloud connectivity to devices. But if you've got AnyDesk does struggle a bit with providing a direct connection to devices. So, both are good products, but how well they do connectivity is a question mark for customers in some situations. Just before we move on, we have customers, and this is a growing space in operational technology environments, completely air-gapped environments and customers aren't entirely sure how many devices are there or when they're going to be asked to support them. But customers we worked with the other day was talking about this. They're now being asked to support these type of devices in this air-gapped environment. And it's about finding a solution that works with those operating systems, which are a little bit more dated because they're running high processes and they really can't afford any downtime. So we're watching that space with operational technology in a bit more detail now to work out if there's more of a hybrid approach needed in these environments as well. So we're going to move on now to interoperability, and this talks a bit more about
before we dive in, if you don't mind me disturbing for a second, guys, can everyone see the slides that are being shown right now? Just to double check, can we get a show of hands who can see the slides? I think there may be a few people that can see them, perhaps maybe a few people that can't. If you could just post that in the Q&A, please.
There's a lot of hands up, so I think we're okay.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for checking, though. I didn't know. Okay. All right. So for interoperability, what we're really talking about here is mobile support, what sort of operating systems can be supported and how old, also the end of life policy for certain versions of the software. And on the next slide, this is probably the best way to demonstrate that across those vendors. So it's not uncommon to find discrepancies between different operating systems, particularly about how well those operating systems are supported. So you can see there's a lot of green in there, as you'd expect. Excuse me. Most vendors are going to want to support as many operating systems as they can. But it's about what they can do once they've actually got support for that. So if you've got a diverse operating support group, then you're going to want a solution that does all those things to a good standard. So if you're looking at VNC-based applications, then historically, Linux users would like to use VNC in those situations. I think the key now is how well vendors will support iOS and Android. I think there's good knowledge in the industry now that with Android, there's more flexibility there, right? To be able to view the device and control it. And RealVNC Connect just released that actually control for Android devices. With iOS, there are limitations and rightly so in that space. So at manufacturer level, you can view a device, but you don't have that ability to control it. And it's unlikely for that to change anytime soon, right? So there's got to be a balance about what you want to get from that and what you're prepared to accept. And obviously having support for multiple operating systems means you've also got good coverage, right? So we have customers that will use RDP to access servers. They'll use Apple Remote Desktop for their Mac devices, and they may use Microsoft Teams to support, everyday users of laptops and desktops. And those three situations are okay, but it becomes a bit of a problem when you're looking at consistency with functionality across all those platforms. And Jordan worked with a customer recently who had an occasion like this where multiple operating systems were being used. Jordan, maybe it's a good time to share.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Again, almost very similar situation to the last answer I gave, which was the business was changing, and businesses do change. They adapt as they grow and as the markets change. And quickly, from a manufacturing perspective, this company was growing. And from a manufacturing perspective, they tended to favor Linux devices. And the business they had chosen to go with from a remote access perspective said they offered Linux support. The reality was that support was in no way, shape, or form as good or as powerful as the Windows support that they offered. And again, this is what we kind of have droned on about a little bit within this webinar, which is it's really important when you are making that decision to go with the remote access vendor to sit down and understand what does it look like now, but also what does the future look like with this platform as well. What do we want to be achieving in 1, 2, 3 years time? Because it does take a lot of time, effort, and understanding from a business perspective to finally onboard, this new product. So when you do choose that product, you want to make sure you're making that right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could spend more time on this slide, but I think we've got a good one coming up with scalability, and I'm just conscious of time. So if we move on to a scalability of a solution, and really what we're talking about here again is the pre-sales process, right? Does the vendor understand your requirements in enough that from day one you can roll the software out and start seeing the impact of that solution? So with deployment, you want to be up and running straight away rather than weeks. Our philosophy really is that we don't expect customers to want to go through a certification program to be able to use the software and deploy it. Remote access space with the vendors we're talking about today are not particularly complicated solutions to get pushed out there in terms of needing hardware or additional rack space to get the application out there. But there are things to consider regarding configuration and deployment tools. And it used to be the case that vendors would have their own solutions to be able to deploy the product. Now, our philosophy at RealVNC is about having already familiar tools that sysadmins would use every day, like group policy objects, MSIs, deploying through Jamf, these solutions and deployment methods to work with that. And we've got this slide here that will talk about GPOs, and also for larger customers, they're going to want to say, well, how much can we automate this? Can we do things through APIs, or do we have to do things manually? And we keep talking about the pre-sales process, but it's really important that a vendor nails that to work out, okay, they've got 2,000 devices. From previous use cases, we can see that APIs is the best way for them to remove devices from the group, add users in, and really sanitize what's going on with their devices. And it shouldn't be hard to do that. It should be a part of the process you go through that you don't have to dedicate resource to it to actually deploy the software and keep maintaining it. And this is what Jordan was talking about at the start, right? About total cost of ownership. Like, if it's easy to deploy, it means that you don't have to dedicate resources to it all the time to manage it. IT folks have enough to do rather than keep managing an application. So it's an important area to get right in the process as well.
Yeah. Just while we're on scalability, just very, very quickly, sorry to interrupt you. I think for a couple of people, they may still have been stuck on a question that had popped up. As is the case with, I think, 90% of webinars, I don't know who builds these platforms, but they're not very good. So if you don't mind, guys, if you can only still see that question, please just refresh it. For the most part, I think that's allowing most people to come back in and actually see the presentation. We've not got too much longer, I guess, to go and cover with this, but at least you'll be able to see, the rest of this. And in terms of scalability as well, I think it's really important to just say that, and this is something that Richard touched on, a beginning, a middle, and an end in terms of a relationship is incredibly important when you are choosing a partner to work with. You have to have the beginning where you get clarity as to what their operations are, what their product is like, what support they truly offer. From a security perspective, they say they're secure, but can they actually prove they're secure? Getting that clarity in the beginning is incredibly important. From a middle perspective, getting onboarded correctly as well, getting insight into how the product works. If you've got a problem, speaking to a human being to make sure that you're comfortable using that product is great. And finally, at that ending, like, what does that renewal process look like? How much are they giving you in terms of flexibility? That really helps the entire journey in terms of making sure you get to where you need to be.
Yeah, and I think that moves us nicely on to what we're talking about next with licensing and pricing. And maybe some people are wondering why it took so long for us to get to this particular slide, but you'll probably see in the industry there's different ways that companies will license. And to give a few examples, vendors will license per seat. per user. Some companies will do it per concurrent connection, so that would be called a channel in that case. And and if we talk about what John mentioned at the start about total cost of ownership, it's not just the licensing fee that you have to consider, but it's the time it will take to manage it. Is it frictionless to be able to increase or decrease your licensing? Can you get quotes easily? How much can you self-serve as well? We work with customers, and when we go through a proposal, it's important that we highlight what's actually included in the subscription, right? So there's lots of add-ons nowadays. I've already referred to APIs as a way to manage devices. APIs will sometimes come with a higher cost, especially if you're dealing with a lot of devices. Customers will want to they'll want to integrate with their identity provider. So I mean, at RealVNC Connect, we'll integrate with Azure AD SSO. So from a management perspective and with conditional access, they'll want to use that type of tool. So it's whether that's included in the price or if there's an add-on supplied to it as well. And also mobile support, iOS and Android, will that be provided? Is an MDM required as well to deploy the software? These are all things that need to be under the consideration as well. And our philosophy really is that there should be a flexible approach. You know, customers will have a situation where they're highly weighted on the number of devices and they're lower weighted on the number of support technicians. So we want to give flexible options, which is what we have right now. We have a per user or a per device model. And when we're talking about this internally, John, we're also talking about with so most of the customers that will onboard will be using another tool. That's the reality of the situation. It's quite rare to come into a situation where they're not using anything. So, John, you had some experiences about notice periods and things to leave certain tools. Could you give some insight?
Yeah, it's about like making sure. And guys, I'm in sales, so I'll always try and give you the best deal possible, right? But it's about, from a business perspective, trying to make sure that you're getting the truth and honesty from the get-go. What we tend to see, in a lot of this is actually how we get a large proportion of the business coming through from competition. What we tend to see in terms of why they come to us is the price for the first year is incredibly low, almost like too good to be true. And that incentivizes you as a business to make that purchase, go ahead. And sometimes, you know, from a negative perspective, sometimes you make that decision regardless if you're maybe a little bit iffy perhaps about even some of the product offerings that they have, because it's so good. And then in that, you know, renewal period, the prices get hiked up and you get pushed additional products that potentially you'd have no need for at all. You know, we've seen price jumps up like, you know, 25-30% in that second year. So again, from a business perspective, when you are sitting down with these companies, having clarity for not just year one, but year 2, year 3, year 4 is really, really important. It'll give you the peace of mind that actually you have stability when you are on that journey. But more importantly as well, it holds them accountable to a certain level of excellence. You know, they need your business more than you think.
Yeah, and a recent stat I saw, there was that 83% of CIOs say they have to achieve more with less, and that's entirely relevant when it also comes to licensing and pricing of the product as well. So yeah, there's lots of areas to watch for in this space and get clarity on when you're going through that process. And it's good to get things in writing from the vendor, especially when it comes to a good deal the first year and working out what the price is going to be on the first year renewal, right? Okay, so we'll move on to support and reliability. So obviously a really important area, particularly in the moment. And you want to, there's a few things that you should look at in this space, right? So there's areas that you can go to that are highly available, like the status pages of a particular vendor, what their uptime's been like in the last 90 days. That should be well documented. You want to see how many times they've been going for scheduled maintenance. You also want to look at the times where they've gone for unscheduled maintenance, because that is a red flag, and you certainly want to get clarity on what happened. Jordan works a lot with customers, and he points them through to independent review sites, right? So Jordan, give me an example of the best place to go for when you want to get some.
So maybe I'm a little bit biased here, Richard, because I used to work for them. But Trustpilot, honestly, is a fantastic way to go and verify, companies and their performance. You have to with Trustpilot, when you're leaving a review, you have to go through a bit of like a credibility process. So generally, for the most part, those reviews are exactly, what they say they are, and they give you a bit more clarity. G2 is great as well. But I think what Richard is trying to lean on here is that it's very easy for a business to pat themselves on the back and say, look how good we are. This is amazing. We do all of these things so well. It's very different when you get it from a customer. And that's really what you should be looking at. What are the customers saying about this product? What is their feedback? And, what do they like and what do they not like? Before I jump into another rant here, guys, I want to make sure we're answering some of these questions. And we had a couple of them come through, Rich. And Ben, I don't know if you could jump into some of these as well. But let's go through the first one, which is, will you provide an MSP platform so we resell licenses much faster? And that's from Miguel.
Yeah, so the MSP space is big, and certain vendors have a good footprint in that. If we look at ConnectWise, they're pretty good for appealing to MSPs. We do work with MSPs through our channel in particular, and what we found with MSPs is they really enjoy having a flexible licensing model. A lot of them will want to license or pay based on usage, right? So how many times do we support that customer this month? Okay, we know what that cost looks like. In terms of our platform of RealVNC Connect, we'll provide some flexibility in terms of we can do it per user or per device. In terms of an actual platform where you would live in that console and do other functions outside of remote access, we do have another solution in place. It's not exclusively set for MSPs, but it does allow you to run scripts, run commands, tunnel into devices, and provides a lot more flexibility with that. Hopefully that answers your question, but we're happy to provide more detail on that as well.
Yeah. I've got one more for you, Rich, while you're there, and I've got your ear, which is how is RealVNC handling or preparing for CMMC compliance? For example, are you working on FedRAMP moderate achievement?
Should I take that one? Should I jump in there?
Yeah, please, Ben. Thank you.
So as I mentioned earlier, we've recently gone through our ISO 27001 compliance, which we're super proud of. And as I'm sure people are aware, this isn't just a tick box exercise. There's a lot involved with this, and it's a continuous process. It's something that's rechecked over time, externally, but obviously internally. Again, we're constantly working on it. We're constantly going through the processes and reviewing things. So that was kind of step one, and then going beyond ISO 27001, you then look to see what's next, whether it's SOC 2 or other kind of related compliances. But what we do find is there's a lot of overlap. So once you've got the one, quite often it's just extra things on top to try and build on top of that. So I think what we'll do is take customer feedback on and see where what are customers asking for now. Is it FedRAMP? Is it other compliance related certifications?
Nice one. Thank you, Ben. And one more, which is, do you offer options to buy multi-year support at one time? I can actually probably answer a couple of these. This is more my territory as well. The answer is yes. I think what we want to do is we want to make sure when we are sitting down with businesses, we're getting insight into what your operations look like and what it is that you're looking to achieve. RealVNC has been around for a long time, and we've been a customer-focused business for a very long time as well. For a long time, RealVNC was open source. We wanted it and always have tried to appeal to people within the tech industry. And every business that comes through our doors has different requirements. We want to be as flexible to them as possible. Now, a second question that's just come through is, Jordan, you mentioned a customer earlier that had a big deployment. What did their rollout look like? How long does it typically take? And is the support team involved? I can tell you, James, that we're involved at every single step of the way. The rollout, it differs from customer to customer. That one customer, it's taken a little while to get them to a point where they were ready to roll out. That's because they had hundreds and hundreds of factories across the world, and each of those factories had different requirements. So from a business perspective, it was really tricky to make sure that we could find that balance of getting them further down the line in terms of what their objectives were, and making sure everyone in those factories were happy as well. So it really depends on every single business. But what I will say is we have a fantastic support team here at RealVNC. From our account managers to our customer success executives, you're not going to be speaking to a robot at the end of the phone. And one of the things that this business did say at the end of the process is that we were incredibly easy to work with. I think that comes from actually sitting down from an operational perspective and getting clarity on what you guys are looking for. If we can understand who you are, what you want to achieve, then it makes our jobs a lot easier, and a lot easier, again, like you said there, James, to roll out when you need us to.
Excellent. I think there's another question. I tell you what, let's move on to the last slide here, because this is the last bit of content. But we have flagged that question on the FedRAMP, and Ben will come in on that in a second, if that's all right. So on this slide, we've got about longevity and innovation, and we referred to earlier about what opportunities are there for customers to feed back into the product roadmap. And it's something that we do on a consistent basis at RealVNC. It's important that the roadmap is customer driven, that there's actual good use cases and good needs for new features coming in. And when you're looking at vendors and considering where they spend their money and where they put budget, it's going to be pretty obvious about which vendors are putting back into the product. And you can just go back for the last 6 months into their release notes. Have they released, are they done point releases, or has it been big hitting releases with features that are useful and going to be adopted by customers? If there have been a lot of point releases and nothing particularly new, then maybe they're putting their budget somewhere else, into sponsorship deals or becoming reactive to security incidents. So you'll get a good sense, especially with what's going on in the industry, about where investment happens and if it's back into the product. And it's an important area to keep an eye on as well. So I'm conscious of time, and we've got the question from Andrew regarding FedRAMP. Ben might be able to come back on that, but can you give a bit more clarity on that, Ben?
Yeah, so kind of what I covered earlier was we've got the ISO 27001. We're now looking at getting customer feedback on what's next. I think FedRAMP is specifically for cloud services and stuff, so I don't know if that's specifically something that we're looking at. It would probably be more something like SOC 2 or some other compliance as the next thing to look at.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Jordan. We're coming towards the end, so we should have a look at these common pitfalls. Can you help us out?
Yeah, 100%. Just before we move on, guys, the question, I'm not sure if we actually asked that question out loud, but I think it was, you indicated that you're working on FedRAMP, right? Is there a time frame for achievement? Just to give you some clarity and context for that answer as well. Yeah, and in terms of pitfalls, I think like I said, we covered quite a few of these over the call. But really what it boils down to is understanding what you're walking into. What does that look like in terms of, remote access product? What are the connectivity options that they have? What are the security options that they have? What is the cost of actually purchasing this product in the long and the short term? What support options do they have? All of this comes under one single banner, which is the total cost of ownership. And making that decision can sometimes be a little bit daunting. There's 1,000,001 different products out there. They all offer the world. But I think the way that you boil it down is just by sitting down and having a conversation with someone and just trying to get, honest clarity from them. And I always say that it's best to trust your gut instinct. If you're not getting the advice that you need, if people aren't supporting you throughout that journey, if they're not providing you the information that you need as well, then that will quickly tell you about the rest of the business too. Yeah.
Okay, great. If we move on one slide, I'll take a couple of questions. There's a couple more that come up, but if you slide it on one more, there's a question regarding saying our roots started in open source and you focused on meeting the needs of the clientele. What would you say is the closest open source product available? I can help with that one. So we work a lot with customers that are coming from solutions like Ultra VNC, Tight VNC, and Tiger VNC. And usually a customer will come to us because they've been told to move because they've had a recent audit and VNC has been flagged as potentially troublesome. And we don't like to kick our long lost cousins in the VNC space, but we moved across in 2002 and provided an encrypted and authenticated product. And what that means is customers that liked using VNC would like to continue using a VNC based product. And the innovations that we've done over the years, particularly with cloud and putting in security measures in place, means it's a much easier hop to RealVNC from those solutions. And they're already familiar with how it works. They like using it, but they just need something more secure. They definitely want encryption, they want authentication, and they definitely want access control so they can track who's accessing devices and have some auditability, which is what we're really talking about when it comes to going through an IT audit, or particularly a penetration test, which Ben can talk more about. But yeah, they're the closest options, and they typically have the same concerns when we do the discovery call with them as well.
I think Richard, I was going to just jump in there. I was just going to say, I think you make a great point. Is that there's something that we don't potentially clear up enough, is that there's open VNC and RealVNC difference. As you said, that RealVNC Connect is very different to what was the old open source VNC product from many years ago. And VNC Connect obviously has all these different cloud options available, but it does still have direct connectivity available. So again, just looping back to the FedRAMP connection question, direct connections could be used for those kind of situations.
Yeah, and I think whilst on the topic of open source VNC, there was a question earlier about, and it said, will you have a proxy server option similar to what Ultra VNC provides in the near future? I think we need a bit more clarification on that point, but maybe this talks a bit about the connectivity options being direct and also cloud. So why would you need a proxy server? With proxy servers, we have customers that we worked with in the past that have connected to a jump box server, then from there jump to an actual device, so like a double connection. And if I may have misunderstood the question, but if that's the case, customers do that. There is a question about whether that slows down the connection because you're essentially going to two places. But from a proxy server perspective, as we're a software application, we try and find the quickest way between 2 points with as minimal latency as possible. And it's either a direct connection or our cloud services that will take care of that.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where it depends what your requirements are. Our RealVNC Connect product hopefully has the cloud connectivity options that could help out for the environment that you're looking at to connect to.
So we had a question from Amando, which said they have comparisons of RealVNC with tools such as ISL Online and Zoho. In Colombia, we have a strong competitor, which is ISL and AnyDesk as well. I'm not sure the best way to perhaps answer that question, but I would say there are a lot of similarities with a lot of tools that are out there. A lot of them do what they say they can, which is offer remote access. But it's when you strip them down to their core and really get clarity with regards to what they truly do in terms of connections, in terms of security, where you find the true differences in terms of the product as well. Obviously, we're at the end of our demo here, guys, and I feel free to throw some more questions in there if you have any left to ask. But I wanted to sit down and actually just thank everyone here for attending today. I know Richard, myself, and Ben have burnt your ears off and given you a lot of noise today, but hopefully some of that was relevant. Hopefully some of that was interesting as well. If you want a more personalized conversation with either one of us, we're happy to have that with you. If you scan the QR code, that would be great. We can sit down and have that chat with you and show you how the product works. Or if you just have questions and you want some more information thrown in there as well, please feel free to scan that and we'll be sure to get back to you. But yeah, it's been great to have everyone on this call. Really appreciate everyone spending the time to sit with us today. And yeah, we can't wait to hopefully speak to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Ben. It was great to share some thoughts there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.